Hello, hello, everyone.
Hello, hello, hello.
Welcome. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's Rosh Hashanah for those of us who are Jewish. It's the new year. I thought maybe we could kick off today by sharing something nice that happened to us this week, something that brought you joy or made you feel good. So feel free to say hello in the chat and tell people how you're feeling and maybe some good news. Um, My good news is yesterday I was watercolor painting with my daughter, and she turned to me and she said, Mama, I like how you're painting that dinosaur red. And I laughed because I give her compliments like that all the time. And it was just like the most adult thing I think she's ever said. Um, she's 2, so um, that brought me a lot of joy. All right, let's see. Looks like most people have joined and have their audio. Um, Oh my God, you have rain in DC. We don't have any rain in Texas, and it's about to be our big music festival, and it's going to be so dusty and terrible for everyone who goes. Um, so jealous. Although I know parts of this country have gotten way, way, way too much rain. And if anyone has been affected by Helene or has family, I'm so sorry. We've definitely been hearing from some colleagues about how challenging that's been. So I hope everyone feels safe. Okay, cool. Oh, chocolate chip cookies, yum. All right, we're gonna get started. I am so excited to introduce you to Mariah. She is back. She taught last year and her class was amazing. Mariah is currently at The Atlantic, where she focuses on driving subscription growth. But she previously worked at Wall Street Journal, McClatchy, Crane Communications, and has tons of news industry experience. And she's going to talk about how you actually make things happen and operationalize your product strategy. So really, really excited for today's class. Mariah, on to you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see your faces and some familiar faces sprinkled throughout, or at least names. Yeah, so Becca, thanks for the intro. Today, yeah, as Becca said, I'll be talking a little bit about how we can operationalize our product strategies. We'll talk a little bit about how to connect the dots. So I'll share my screen and do kind of the logistical stuff first, just to make sure everyone can see it okay. And also I'm going to try to open up the chat so that I can make sure if folks have questions or reactions, I kind of want to make sure I can see that. So Becca and Kyle, I'll also ask for your assistance if things come in and I miss them, but great. All right, cool. So we're talking about how to operationalize product strategy today. Becca kind of gave a really good intro, I think, but just to give a little bit more information about myself, I am currently the executive director at a product at The Atlantic, where I do a lot of different things. Primarily, I oversee the product strategy for subscriber experience, features, and products. I also manage and mentor a team of product managers. I help lead a cross-functional team that includes those product managers, but also product designers, engineers, and data scientists who are all focused on achieving certain outcomes. I also play a big role in helping to influence and establish our culture and workflows to make sure that our work is not only more efficient, but also enjoyable. And I also do everyone's favorite thing, which is to manage stakeholders from all across the organization to effectively reach our goals. And so that's a little bit about my current role, but as Becca mentioned, I've worked at a lot of different places. And like probably a lot of you here, I did not get my start in product management. This is not a career that I chose, it found me. Prior to becoming a product manager, I was a reporter at the historic Ebony and Jet magazines, which are based here in Chicago, which is where I'm located. Then I did a lot of different roles while through my tenure at Crane Communications, from social media strategy to audience engagement, which I think probably set me on a direct path towards becoming a product manager, in that these were bridge-like roles and sat in between the newsroom and the quote unquote business side. And then finally, later in life, kind of working in product management specifically at these brands. And to me, product management is that kind of that ultimate bridge role, in that you're sitting at the center of all of these various departments and trying to work together to achieve goals. So I've worn a lot of different hats, and I think a lot all the time as I talk to other folks in the industry about how do we collaborate better, how do we speak, similar languages, how do we set shared goals, so that we can just better serve our audiences. And I think a lot on a daily basis as a product person about, okay, we have the strategy, hopefully, but how do we actually get it done? How do we get things done? And so I'm really excited to talk about like really practical, hopefully helpful tips for you in thinking about your strategy and how you can actually get it done. And so I think, to me, this quote, maybe it's not fair to say ideas are easy. Really good ideas are actually kind of hard, but I do think sometimes our business does kind of get swept away in ideas, and good ideas are really truly invaluable. But I do think that, we've also potentially have been part of projects where a really good idea turns out really poorly because execution was bad. And so that can be really time consuming and costly even, and maybe in some cases just like demoralizing and like not great to work on a project where the execution is not good. And so I think ideas, are somewhat easy, but execution really does make or break, is kind of what, like in my experience I've seen. And so again, like today, we'll talk a little bit more about how we can make sure that we're backing up those really good ideas with really strong execution as well. And so a couple of objectives for today, just so you kind of hopefully understand what you will walk away with. So we'll talk a little bit about strategy and how we can use that to guide our roadmaps, which is one of the key tools in actually executing on your strategy. We'll talk a lot about prioritization frameworks, so that we can talk about how we can actually drive development sequencing, what we work on first, and how we deliver that, which is really key to execution because you cannot commit to doing everything. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about communicating your roadmap, getting buy-in from across your org, and then how you can work together to get the things done. So as we go through today's class, you probably will hear terminology that you're familiar with, you might not. I'll try my best to kind of pause and explain a couple of different things as we go throughout. But if you do have questions, like please pop them in the chat, or we'll definitely have time for Q&A throughout. So there's that. And then just real quick, this is kind of the agenda. So it's how we'll spend our time. So we'll spend the first part of class really going deep on strategy. We'll do a class activity. We'll go into breakout rooms. We'll work together to kind of apply some of the concepts that we talk about during the first half of class. We'll take a short break, come back, and then we'll finish class talking about communicating roadmaps and then actioning. And then we'll use our time we have left to talk and just talk about any questions you have, whether about what we talk about today or just questions in general about product and career and things like that. So that all sounds good to folks. Actually, I want to hear from y'all a little bit. So we're talking about road mapping today. I'm curious about what kinds of challenges have you had when it comes to road mapping at your organization, if you have road mapping at all. Kind of what are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the things that have you've noticed or have challenges with? Feel free to drop any responses in the chat. Just kind of curious to take the temperature of the room. Shiny object syndrome. Yes. Yeah, totally get that. No one can agree on a framework. Interesting. Silos plus to that. Yes. Resistance in senior management. Conflicting North Star interpretations. That's real. Believing that I want to do X is an adequate roadmap. Yes. Yeah. So I think, gosh, all of these are absolutely challenges, lack of alignment. Oh man, these are all really good. So yeah, I think hopefully today we'll talk and address maybe some of these things, but of course, like as we go through, let's like talk, especially if a question wasn't answered or you wanted advice on like a specific challenge that you're facing with road mapping. Because they're hard. It's really hard. Like being, especially these bridge roles and communicating across all these different departments that have different goals, competing priorities, literally speak different languages. It's really, really hard to try to like coalesce and get everyone to like go in the same direction sometimes. So not an easy job, but not impossible. So we can, hopefully, like I said, address some of these things throughout the class today. 1,000 pluses. The chat is still lighting up, y'all. I love it. Yeah. These are all changes in the team, restructures, new management. Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Again, like I said, if you have questions, continue to drop them in the chat. I'll try my best to keep an eye on it. But we're going to start today talking about how we could build a strategic roadmap. And to start, let's talk about what a roadmap is not. Some of you said exactly what a roadmap is not. It is not just saying, I want to do X. That is not a roadmap. A roadmap is also not a strategy. So while strategy and roadmaps are connected, they are not the same. A strategy is your why. So it's why are we doing what we're doing, while your roadmap is more of the how. So these things are super connected, but they're not necessarily the same, and they should point and speak to each other. So we'll talk today a little bit about how you can do that, but roadmap is not a strategy. It is not a project plan. So a project plan is, something that's a bit more detailed, that goes into specific concrete tasks on how you would actually complete a project. But a roadmap is not that either. So there's, again, like a level of detail that a project plan would have that a roadmap might not. But a roadmap initiative could have its own project plan. So again, those two things are connected, related, but not the same. And then a sprint is also not a roadmap. So if you are a product manager in your current role, or you utilize anything in the agile kind of like methodology, you'll be familiar with the sprint, but a sprint is basically a short time box period where a scrum team, which is, a team typically of a product manager, a designer, and an engineer, who work together to complete a set amount of work in that set amount of time. So we'll talk a lot more about this later when we get into like how we can actually execute on roadmap initiatives. But for now, just understand that a roadmap is also not a sprint. So again, these things are related, not the same. So if those are, what roadmaps are not, we can talk a little bit more about what roadmaps are. They can take a lot of different styles, right? Like they can look like a lot of different things. And so these are a couple of examples of like roadmaps that you might have seen in the wild. Some are spreadsheets, some are Jira boards, some are, slide decks. They really can take a lot of different shapes, and we'll talk later about maybe some formats and some things to consider when you're building your roadmap. But ultimately, a roadmap illustrates concrete initiatives. These are typically products, features, or projects that you as the product manager or the person who's putting forward the roadmap, these are initiatives that you believe will help your team reach the outcomes or goals that you want to achieve. And so a couple of things about how a roadmap, or just philosophies that your roadmap should abide by. A roadmap should be transparent. So I think the biggest thing about a roadmap is that it should not just be with one team in a silo. Like someone mentioned in the chat earlier, a roadmap should really be something that is easily accessible and visible throughout your organization. It should be something that you're referring to often, whether you're in meetings with stakeholders or otherwise with your team, so that everyone has a clear sense of how your team is spending its time. It and helps, again, like your cross-functional partners to understand kind of where the priorities are and how your team is working together to achieve certain outcomes. I think your roadmap should also be prioritized. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we prioritize roadmaps, but it should illustrate in a clear order the priorities that your team has. This also should remain updated so that if priorities do shift as you get into the work, this is also updated as well and clear in that roadmap. And then a roadmap should be flexible. So it probably shouldn't change super drastically day to day, which like a project plan might, but a roadmap probably shouldn't. But your roadmap should be responsive in that, if you get new information or factors change, the roadmap reflects that. And so again, your priorities might shift, or you might decide once you get into developing something or working on something that you actually no longer want to pursue it. And that is actually okay. It's a really uncomfortable thing. Like, it's something that the teams that I work with still struggle with, but is absolutely should be acceptable, and that you get new information, the business context changes, your roadmap can also respond to that. And so a roadmap is truly a living, breathing tool that should be refined over time, and shouldn't be static. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well later. So how exactly can you get to a roadmap? So we talked a little bit about, a roadmap not being a strategy, but it is the culmination of, I think, 4 primary inputs. So your roadmap should point to your ultimate like company vision or North Star. So your roadmap is a collection of initiatives that help support making that vision true. So this is where all of the inspiration for your roadmap should start. So that's kind of like the zoom out when you're thinking about a roadmap, like what collectively is the organization's vision or mission that should, again, kind of connect to your strategy, but also your roadmap. Again, your roadmap should connect to your product strategy. So again, that's the why behind why you're doing what you're doing on your roadmap. And then you have customer input. So ideally, you are talking to the people who you're serving, you're getting feedback in some consistent way. So that could be things that users have requested explicitly from you, or it could be pain points that have been identified. So customer input is absolutely a factor that should be considered when thinking about your roadmap. And then finally, each roadmap initiative should be really have a clear tie to what the business outcomes are, or the business metric that you're looking to improve. And so we'll talk a little bit about, setting certain goals, having really clear understanding of what the outcome or metric that you're looking to impact should be. So that again, there's a clear tie between the initiative, and if that thing gets done, we expect to have this kind of business impact. So when we're talking about roadmaps, I like to really emphasize the word strategic and when talking about a roadmap, just because I think that's kind of the key to making sure that your roadmap doesn't become a list of kind of disconnected projects that may or may not have actual impact on a goal or an outcome. So I think this particular quote does a good job of illustrating this, saying that a strategic roadmap really forces you to constrain and prioritize your initiatives to only those that improve a specific set of objectives and KPIs. So that creates focus in your work, and it makes it easier to get product leadership buy-in. So I know this is something that I've noticed when I first started at The Atlantic. We were really oriented around surfaces, and our teams didn't really own any specific outcomes. And so we've restructured our teams in the last year or so to really be focused on customer or reader outcomes. So thinking about, instead of the surface and saying you own email, really saying actually you own the early, relationship with the reader, and your North Star is going to be, conversion rate or whatever that metric is. So that then that kind of gives the product manager like the space and the ability to think about, okay, what are all of the things, what are all the surfaces that I should consider trying to, improve or create new features for in order to actually impact that outcome. And so I think that's one way to kind of almost set your teams up for success and really making them more outcome focused. But again, I think like that's kind of the tie, and that kind of gets you hopefully away from a world in which, again, you have kind of just a list of ideas, whether from, leadership or from other stakeholders. You're really thinking about, okay, well, actually, what is the end goal? So that's one thing I want to just say here. And to me, I think product managers are really responsible for driving impact. And I think that starts with your roadmap. So your roadmap is really that opportunity for you as a product person, as a product leader, to demonstrate your ability to distill and synthesize a lot of information, whether it's about the business, about your users, about problems to solve, about technical capabilities, and you're taking all of that to try to identify solutions that help create better experiences and products for the user. And that can be external users or internal users if you're working on something like a CMS. So I think we can break down the actual like process of road mapping into 3 steps. First step is so that you can build a strategic roadmap is to define what your focus areas are. Then it'll be to identify potential solutions that could address that focus area. And then it'll be prioritizing initiatives that will ultimately become your roadmap. So we'll walk through some of these steps. And then, like I said, we'll talk a little bit about prioritization frameworks, and we'll kind of do an exercise in a little bit so that you can kind of practice actually applying those frameworks to real initiatives. So to start, let's talk about how we can define a focus area. And this is how we can ensure our roadmaps are strategically focused by revisiting our problem and our opportunity areas. So a great roadmap is motivated by strong insights. So what I mean by that is when I'm thinking about, for me, if I enter into a new role, or even at the start of a new quarter or new year, I really like to think about, okay, what is the area that I've been tasked with? Am I the product manager for audience acquisition? Am I the product manager for subscriber engagement? And I really try to think about, okay, what is all the data that I have at my disposal? So what are some of the goals that might have been set before? How are those goals trending? Are there any impediments towards reaching certain outcomes? So let's say, for example, your product area is meant to drive habit with return readers, or with new readers, but the return rate for those readers have been declining year over year. So that would be something that would be kind of an insight, right? Like, that's interesting. The people who I'm meant to affect, or the metric that I'm meant to affect, is not going in the right direction. So that kind of points to an opportunity. So that would be kind of the first thing. Then it would be, okay, what is all the data that I have at my disposal, whether this is quantitative or qualitative data, so analytics and dashboards related to your KPIs, any results from previous experiments that might have been conducted. Is there any previous audience research on it? So audience interviews or surveys, anything. And kind of, also use the moment to think about, like, should we do interviews, right? Like, you might not have talked to users in that space in a really long time, and you probably need to check the temperature and understand kind of what are pain points or what are potential opportunities. So you can also use this moment of insights gathering to conduct new research. So I think the other thing to mention here is just, this is a moment to, as a user, as a product person, also sitting in this, like in the shoes of a user, or also going through the experiences yourself. So thinking about user journeys. So again, if you are overseeing a specific product area, what are the user journeys that are related to it? Think about and look at and kind of go through them yourself, and try to figure out, are there friction points? Are there gaps in user experience? Are there really obvious low-hanging fruit improvements that you should be making? So kind of doing all of that, I would say, like, is my one of the things that I like to do, is kind of taking all of this, so all of this data, all of the survey information, all the research, and I kind of put it into just like a Google Doc or some sort of like Scratchpad document when I'm going through this process. And this kind of helps me start to think about, okay, where are there like interesting, compelling things? Where are there potential opportunities for feature or product development? What's changed recently? What's something that might need improving? Did we learn something recently that could motivate us to switch tactically? And this really helps me start to massage that like document that's initially really ugly and just has like a lot of stuff in it. I start to massage it into something that helps me create an overall narrative or storyline about my product or about my focus area, which is really helpful, again, in helping to shape like the strategy and like what are the opportunity areas for us to actually like make positive improvement or have positive outcomes for. So that's kind of the insights gathering step. So once you have all that relevant data, you start to review it, and you start to pull out what are, some interesting insights or things that can be translated into problem or opportunity statements. So a couple of examples for ways that you can do this. So these are what insights could look like in this left column. So let's say you're looking at your data, and a couple of things start to stand out around conversion rates have declined by 15% year over year since we changed our paywall rules. Like, that's something that is something notable. Or subscribers are asking about how they can share our journalism with others, or users who read certain newsletters have higher return rates and propensities to subscribe than other segments. So these are kind of like insights that like might inspire a feature idea or a product change. And you could see how those would map to like a problem/opportunity statement. So for declining conversion rates, you could improve conversion rates through value proposition experimentation. For subscribers who want more ways to share journalism, you could enable more ways to share journalism for subscribers to help increase traffic and generate more subscription value. And then for newsletters, readers who have those high return rates and higher subscribe propensities, you could encourage more signups to engagement driving newsletters. So that's kind of one way that you can start to take an insight and think about, okay, actually, like, how do I translate that to like something that could actually be actionable and something that we could orient ideation around? I think as a product manager, again, knowing the full context of the space that you oversee is going to be up to you to determine what the insights are and the opportunities are that are most urgent for you to address. And that's where your strategy should guide you. So which opportunities align most closely with your strategy? Which opportunities seem really urgent to address based on the severity of that issue or the potential upside? And so as you're doing this, as you're going through kind of like your data dump or whatever it is that you use to kind of get to those insights, try to take that into account. Like remember that your strategy and try to think about what's most urgent to address. Cool. So once you have your problem or opportunity statement, you can start to think about explicit goals to shape your roadmap around. So these can be SMART goals, or these can be OKRs, which are objectives and key results, or something else, but basically they should just explicitly state what the desired outcome is. And this will help, again, when you're trying to narrow your focus for your roadmap, and also when you get into trying to ideate and come up with solutions, it'll kind of force a little bit of like focus so that your team is ideating in the same direction. So some examples is noted here. For conversion rate improvement, a goal could be to experiment or launch one to two new benefits or features that could improve conversion rates by 10 to 15% by end of Q1. Subscriber sharing, the goal could be let's implement some highly requested new sharing functionality for subscribers to help improve satisfaction and increase the traffic. And then for newsletter signups, the goal could be let's increase newsletter signups by 5% through on-site experimentation by the end of Q1. So basically, my recommendation is, before you start thinking about potential solutions, you can do this step first and get really sharp on your outcomes that you want to achieve in the near term. And again, this can help you get away from that world where you just have a lot of ideas or a lot of kind of things that are kind of coming from the top down, and instead really being grounded in insights to help shape your goals and outcomes before you even consider what types of initiatives to do. So I think this is important to do as a product manager, or again, a person overseeing the roadmap before you start to bring in other stakeholders. So to me, I think this primarily because you want to have a clear point of view on kind of what the goals should be and outcomes before you start to tag in other cross-functional partners. And this way, I think it gives a product manager a bit more autonomy and helps you avoid becoming a ticket taker, which is something that I've experienced in past product roles. And then you find yourself only in a position where you're only executing on others' ideas, which can be a little bit deflating sometimes, right? Especially when you really see like actually the opportunity should be this, but instead you're kind of getting just ideas thrown at you. So I think to me, it's really good to kind of do this step and do the homework and, kind of form your own point of view before you start to have conversations. So you're coming from a place of knowledge, and you can talk about like why this is important, and here's what I found, and here are the opportunities, and really again feel a bit more confident in kind of those conversations as you start to talk to stakeholders. So that being said, I will say as you're gathering and you're synthesizing your data, it is a really good idea to check your assumptions and any conclusions that you're starting to draw with other partners, like your data, if you have a data analyst or audience research people or any other subject matter experts. I think it's good to tap them so that you can make sure that you're drawing accurate insights to drive your roadmap. So You do not want to be in a position where you are building a roadmap around an insight that is actually not accurate, because you had a false interpretation of the data, or you just, maybe made a big assumption. So while I'm saying, come to your own perspective first, I think you can still come to that perspective in collaboration with certain subject matter experts, so that, again, as you're putting together those insights, you have a lot more confidence that, like, the insight is correct, because that has happened to me before as well. Not great. So that is step one. Step two is to start to identify potential solutions. So this is the fun part. This is where we get to start talking to cross-functional partners and start thinking about ways that we can address some of those identified opportunities. So this is where we can do things like cross-functional team brainstorms. We can mock up ideas with wireframes and user testing. We can come back to more audience research and do more user interviews and surveys and other types of research methodologies, so that we can help develop the concepts and the solutions that might address some of those goals that we outlined before. You can start to find, lightweight ways to experiment or A/B test if you want to build more confidence around a potential solution and get some quantitative feedback before you invest further time into developing or deploying something. For me, what I really like to do at this step is I love a good brainstorm. I love a good productive brainstorm. And I think one of the ways that I've found brainstorms to be a little bit more successful is when I actually do use some of those insights that I've put together to help guide the brainstorm. So what I'll do is I'll share a brief with the participants of the brainstorm. So I'll invite cross-functional partners from marketing and editorial, and from, our advertising side, if the particular focus area is relevant to them, and designers, of course, and engineers as well, who often aren't asked to brainstorm. But if you can get an engineer in your brainstorm, it's actually really, really exciting, because they kind of think about things from a different perspective. And I'll kind of draft a brief that kind of borrows from that insight stock. So that insight stock kind of starts to turn into something like a discovery brief, is what we call it internally. And that has some of the findings and again, some of the highlights of what I found in the data, and or competitively, or whatever I think the opportunities are in the space. And that kind of gives the people who are going to be brainstorming a bit more context. So we're not coming in just green and, fully blue sky. They're actually have the same access to the same data that I have, and they have a bit more context about kind of what we're going to be ideating around and why. So I'd like to share that in a Google Doc. Before the brainstorm, I ask them to respond and leave comments in the document before we actually get into the brainstorm. And then in that brainstorm, I try to keep it as focused as possible, and I use those opportunity areas that I've already defined as the jumping off point. So if we were to go back to that previous example, like, I could put something like, I want to enable more ways for subscribers to share, so that we can increase subscription value for subscribers, but also generate traffic. And like, that could be on like one sticky note, and then participants can brainstorm and jot down ideas that can map back to that. And so that's one way that I've been able to like kind of help organize and structure brainstorm, and still kind of get ideas from different collaborators, but have them kind of all pointed in the same direction. And sometimes I'll even ask participants to draft their ideas in the hypothesis format. So an example could be like, if we offer a single page checkout, it will increase our conversion rates because it will reduce friction during the checkout process. So instead of someone just kind of giving an idea, like actually asking them to think about, okay, how is that idea going to actually address the problem? Sometimes if you encourage people to almost jot down their ideas in the hypothesis format, that can help kind of connect it a bit more. So those are some tips for brainstorming that have, again, been successful for me, and have been fruitful. And honestly, sometimes I come out of those meetings and I'm literally able to kind of like export it and like kind of massage it a little bit. And then I kind of have like a really solid list of ideas to think about for my roadmap. So highly recommend. Okay, but what if your stakeholders ask you to build something that does not align with any goals or opportunities that you've outlined? This is going to happen. This is absolutely going to happen. And I would say it's okay if roadmap initiatives do not always ladder up directly to goals and strategy. I think this is honestly a reality. Because our teams, especially if you are on a product team, your teams often will get tasked with supporting other teams throughout the org, whether it's spearheading a platform migration or you're executing on an initiative that's a priority for another team. And again, this is kind of to be expected, but for me, when this comes up and a stakeholder does come with an idea or something that feels disconnected from anything that I think is, an opportunity or a goal, I try first to understand what the motivation is behind where the request is coming from. So, trying to ask and have conversations before kind of saying no, trying to understand, is this a crucial capability that's blocking a particular team from doing their best work or reaching a certain goal? Sometimes everything sounds urgent, but sometimes it actually isn't, especially as you talk to them more, you actually start to understand that this actually isn't that urgent and it's really just a nice to have. Do they have a hypothesis? They might not even know what a hypothesis is, but like maybe there's a way that you could start to get at like, what is their hunch for why building that thing is going to actually help reach a certain goal? And then think about, is that thing that they're asking for something that actually could tie back to your goals, and or is it something that you might be willing to make a trade-off for? So I think as a product manager, like I said, everything's going to sound urgent, especially when certain stakeholders will come and request things. But I think it's your job to try to unpack that and try to get a sense of what the actual priority is as you talk to them and understand kind of the motivations behind it. So it's not easy. And it's absolutely kind of like a negotiation with every roadmap. But I think my, again, advice would just be to try to understand motivation before kind of defaulting to a no. All right. So last step, we're going to talk about how we can prioritize these initiatives. So we've already identified potential solutions to address opportunities in our focus area. So now we should be in a place where we can prioritize. And this is where you're going to compare and rank potential solutions to ultimately help your team decide what to build and the order to build it in. So there are a lot of frameworks out there. And I think someone jotted down earlier, like, that is one of the things we cannot agree on even inside of our organization. But I think some of the common inputs to prioritization frameworks are around impact. So how large of an impact on our goal do we think we'll make with this specific initiative? Effort is really a big part of prioritization. So how much effort, or development wise, but also with other resources, do we think this body of work will require? And then strategic fit. So how much does this align with our strategic priorities or any goals that are set by the company? So prioritization frameworks are really nice because you are able to put, different initiatives side by side and start to compare them against each other and see how they stack up. But I will also make the disclaimer of this is partly art and partly science, because a lot of these inputs are subjective and open to your own interpretation. But it is one kind of way you can start to make decisions about what to execute on first. So that's one thing I will say, is that it is not the end all be all. You will still need to kind of make your own kind of decisions about kind of where things should go, and what to execute on first. How do you handle the emotional politics of this? Yeah. We'll talk. So I guess to get into some of the methodology, so we have RICE, which is probably one of the most popular frameworks for how to prioritize a roadmap. So for RICE, each of those, it's an acronym, so each letter stands for something. So the R is for reach, which is about how many people will this particular initiative impact within that time period that you're planning for. There's the I for impact, which is how much will this particular initiative impact each user, and that is graded on a scale of 0, minimal, low impact, to 3, which is high or massive impact. Then you have a C for confidence, which is how confident are you in your estimates? Because sometimes you're going to have like really high confidence in your estimates, and like you feel really sure about like the effort, and you feel really sure about all the other pieces, and sometimes you're not going to be that confident. So like you kind of rank like your confidence level, and that's on a scale of of percentages. So 100% being really high confidence. And then you have finally the E for effort, which is how many person months, which is like a weird terminology, but how many person months will this initiative take to complete, which basically just means, you know, how many total, if you were to estimate all of the resources that you need to get that done, so that's product design, engineering, copy, QA, whoever, what period of time would you need in order to get that work done? And so if you think a project will take, you know, 3 person months, then that effort score is going to be 3. I would say don't get too worried or about the details or like in the weeds on this. This is really, again, just meant to be estimates. So sometimes I think when we have deployed prioritization frameworks, I think people get really like, you know, into the weeds and want to feel really, really, really confident about like their effort and all of that. But I think some of this is kind of gut feel. Obviously, you want to make these estimates based on some information, and we'll talk a little bit about like some ways that you can do that. But basically, you kind of just want to understand at a high level, is this thing going to be really hard and take us 6 months, or is this thing going to be pretty simple and we think we can get it done in a month? So that is RICE. Some of the pros of RICE is that it's really it's a simple framework. It's easy to be able to compare and quantify different features. And in order to use it, it requires that you understand inputs like impact and effort, so you can identify gaps or any uncertainties with those estimates while you're conducting this exercise. But no framework is perfect. And I think some cons or just some things to be aware of with this method is that scores are, again, subjective. And because of that, you know, you probably want to think about, especially in cases where, let's say, maybe you're doing some estimating with other people, that you all have some like clear estimation guidelines on how you're ranking something, you know, higher impact or high or lower impact. Just kind of have a sense of like making sure that you all are kind of doing that in the same way. The RICE method also doesn't factor in things like strategic importance or potential dependencies. So again, this is why I say, you know, a prioritization framework is helpful, but it isn't gonna 100% give you the answer, right? Like I think you still are gonna need to know strategically what's important and if there are dependencies or blockers to getting certain things done. Emily asks, I'm sorry, I'm trying to follow the chat here.
No, I think you answered it. I was asking like, is there like a RICE scale or is it relative like within an organization? But I think you answered it with this.
Got it. Okay. Got it. Cool. So we'll keep going and we definitely can talk more about frameworks or prioritization frameworks in a second when we get to the exercise. But there's also ICE, which is similar to RICE minus the R, but instead of an E for effort, this uses ease, which answers the question, if you consider cost and time, how easy is this to implement? And this is on a scale of 1 being very difficult to 10 very easy. So the pros, I think, are pretty similar for ICE as it is to RICE, and that it's really easy framework to use when you're comparing and ranking different initiatives. But similar challenges also exist in that there's, you know, again, the subjectivity factor, and then also the lack of other inputs like strategic importance. And then I think, did someone mention this earlier? Well, one of the other pretty popular frameworks is effort versus impact. So with this framework, you have a matrix with 4 quadrants based on the potential impact of the initiative and the effort required to achieve that impact. So initiatives are plotted against this matrix with rankings like, you know, here are the quick wins, which are low effort and high impact, versus things that might be thankless tasks, which are lower impact, and have high effort. So it kind of helps you start to visualize, you know, where things would go and what you should spend time on versus what you should maybe consider not doing at all. So this framework is really great because it is also simple to use, but it has this like visual element that makes it really easy to categorize high and low impact features. But again, there is a theme here, ranking is subjective. So again, identifying the true impact of any given initiative is really hard, especially before you do it. So I think, you know, especially in the cases where you haven't done something like it before, or you haven't been talking to users, so it's really hard to evaluate what the impact might actually be. And this framework also tends to undervalue initiatives that are important but might not provide clear value to an end user. So things that are like behind the scenes work, like technical initiatives, might fall into that category. So I think, again, this is a good tool to use, but it's, again, not an exact science. And you can kind of use any one of these frameworks as you see fit to help you, again, start to pull apart, like, what are the things you should go after maybe first? What are the things that are going to be like super valuable, but are also going to be maybe super time consuming, and start to figure out like, okay, how do I determine my priorities ultimately for my roadmap? So one thing I recommend during prioritization is to make sure that you're in conversation with engineers or any technical partners if it's possible, so that you can get an accurate sense of effort. I feel like this is a big pitfall, especially in cases where you might have engineering teams that are not, they might be like outsourced, right? And you might not have as much visibility into what the engineering staff or have access to that engineering staff. But I think if you can, I think it's really important, because effort kind of makes or breaks the project. And if you have a good sense of effort, you can have a better understanding of what you could actually get done in that quarter. And so one of the things that I like to do when we're doing kind of the estimation and prioritization before road mapping is holding a separate meeting with engineers to start to discuss each initiative. So we call these capacity planning meetings. And we basically, talk at a really high level, because at that point, I might have ideas of what might come onto the roadmap, but I might not know all of the requirements and details at that point. But I can start to talk about, okay, here's what we want to do. This is where we think it's going to live. Like, we don't have designs yet, but like, here's kind of what we're thinking. And I try to get to understand, or I try to help them understand kind of, again, the high level brush strokes of what the feature or product might do. And then I try to understand from them, what parts of that might be technically challenging, which parts might actually make it a little bit simpler, and what are some like key questions or maybe dependencies that like we might need to consider if we were to pursue something like that. And so even just having that conversation at a high level, it will help. It always helps you understand kind of what the overall effort might be, but it also gives you a sense of like how to actually strip down the thing to make it a slimmer version of itself, right? So we talk about MVPs and minimum viable products, and that's something that you're always thinking about is like, how can I get something launched and start to learn and get an understanding of the potential impact, so that I can continue to iterate on it instead of kind of spending a lot of time and resources building something and then launching it and finding out that it actually doesn't do what it should do. And so all that to say is that it starts kind of in those estimation conversations. You can kind of get hints and signals from your engineers or technical partners about what things might be easy or might be hard. Yes, 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 to the last comment, engineers do this all the time. So I will say to the folks in here, I'm sorry if you are an engineer, if your engineer tells you it's easy, like ask more questions, and maybe even just to be safe, go a t-shirt size up, right? Like if they tell you this is a small effort, maybe a medium, right? Like always try to couch it a little bit, because there are always unforeseen challenges. There are always things that you learn when you get into the actual work that you did not anticipate. And so I think I always kind of, if I get one answer, and honestly, if you have multiple engineers, sometimes you kind of have a better chance at kind of getting like a range of answers, so that you can kind of say, okay, this engineer said it's easy, but this one says it's hard. So like, let's go with the hard. But yes, that is 100% true, in that like engineers often do underestimate the time and effort. And that's just, kind of like it's going to happen. And again, at this point, you are only trying to get estimates anyway, so they're never 100% accurate, but it is good to kind of like couch it a little bit and say, yeah, it might be a little bit harder. And exactly, just under promise and over deliver is always a better place to be in. Cool. So we're getting close to the exercise. So I just want to kind of talk about one more thing kind of in relation to prioritization and how we can actually start to realistically plan for the time set. So once you have all of your initiatives prioritized and stack ranked in order of priority, one thing you want to do at that moment is ask, what can your team realistically accomplish within the time frame set? So everyone plans roadmaps maybe on different time frames. A lot of times they're quarterly. Some people try to do, twice a year. They might be on some other cadence, but whatever that time frame set is, you want to also be like, hopefully pretty accurate or close to accurate about like what you can actually get done in that time frame. And that is again to that point of let's, under deliver or over deliver and not overcommit. And it also kind of helps you this is important to answer because it'll help you make sure that you don't actually overcommit and that you're not including too many initiatives in that time frame that is not realistic for your team to complete. So this is where you would want to draw what we call, at least this, I don't think we coined this at all, but this is what I've been calling a confidence line, which is basically where you can cap what you commit to based on what your team has accomplished in a previous similar time frame. So I'll try to explain this. And if it doesn't make sense, we can talk more about this later, but I've been doing this recently and it's been really helpful. But basically, if your engineers or the people who are primarily executing on your roadmap initiatives typically complete 200 story points for roadmap initiatives in a quarter, like that is your cap, right? So if they can only complete about 200 story points, which story points basically are how much work they were able to get done in that quarter, that is your cap. So let's say the number is 200. And you would get those story point estimates from engineering teams during that roadmap planning. So when you were talking to engineers and trying to get estimates on like how hard or easy is this thing, you can usually get a t-shirt size. So a t-shirt size could be extra small to an extra large. And what I will do when I get those estimates from engineers is I take those sizes and I try to map them to story points. So a small would be, there's kind of a scale that we use. You can create your own scale. And thank you, Becca, for dropping in some story point references for folks if you want to take a look at that later. But I'll take those t-shirt sizes and map them to story points. So we usually use, or most people use the Fibonacci sequence to rank each ticket that you have that ladders up to a body of work. So this would be, this particular task is a 1, this is a 3, this is a 5, this is a 15, or whatever those numbers are. So I kind of map those back. And then at that point I have a number of points and I can add all of this up. And in a second, when I show you the spreadsheet, this will make maybe a little bit more sense. But basically, once every initiative has its own set of points, I add them all up. And if I hit the team's cap, so let's say I get to 300 points, but I only have 200, then I know I have too many things in that quarter. And that's where I can pull the confidence line up and I say, okay, I actually cannot commit to anything below that line because we can only get about 200 points done in a quarter. So that's one way that you can kind of, again, start to draw a line because you're going to have a ton of ideas. You always will. But you also do have to figure out, okay, we can only maybe get 3 things done, not 7. So we need to draw a line somewhere. Cool. So key takeaways from this last section. When road mapping, remember to start with insights. So identify opportunities by revisiting quantitative and qualitative data. Know your outcomes before you start solutioning and start to define clear goals. Tag partners to help you identify those solutions. So use this moment to be collaborative and tap your cross-functional partners. And finally, just make sure you're prioritizing frameworks on your roadmap and drawing a confidence line so that you can determine the sequence of the work, but also that you're not overcommitting. Okay, great. So now we can get into the exercise and hopefully some of these things will start to connect. So we have a fictional PM. Her name is Mia, and we're going to help her prioritize her roadmap. So before I give you instructions on how the activity is going to work, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background about Mia. So Mia is a product manager for audience growth. And for this particular quarter, her objective is to increase top of funnel growth by enabling more ways to share journalism. Now, she has to do this within the confines of the current paywall rules because she is not the PM for that part of the business. And her team plans their roadmap in quarters. So she has 2 engineers and she has 1 designer who typically get about 70 points done within a quarter. So in a second, I'll drop a link into the Zoom chat and we'll go into a couple of breakout rooms, but let me go ahead and show you what the spreadsheet looks like. So everyone can see the spreadsheet? Yes, okay. I'll zoom in a little bit, but there are instructions here at the top, but basically you'll see at the bottom here, there are tabs for each team. So basically find your team's tab in the spreadsheet and choose one person to be the driver. So they'll be the person who shares screen with everyone else and takes notes as you all talk and discuss and review everything. And basically, you'll go through each one of these initiatives. You'll see that I have already drafted out kind of what the initiative is, what the description is, and then I give some context for what the reach is, some context around what the impact might be, and some context around like the confidence level that they have in those estimates. So once you've calculated those and input those, I've already put in information around what the effort, so you don't have to worry about that. But once you've input into those yellow boxes, so all the yellow boxes here are things that you're changing, you will have a rice score at the end. And these are automatically calculated, so you don't need to do anything here. But once you have the rice score, you'll kind of have a sense of like, okay, here are the scores. And you can start to rank them in priority. So rank them from 1 through 4 and reorganize them however you see fit. But then what you'll notice is she only has 70 points to work within a quarter. So already this list is too many things. So as a team, you're going to want to figure out, okay, which of these things actually we should pull out of the quarter and bring below the confidence line. And so you could literally drag it out or copy and paste it out, however you want to do that. But just understand that they cannot do all of these things. And then just really quick, just for context. So what I was just talking about as far as mapping t-shirt sizes to points, this is basically what I meant. So like we have a scale that we use internally, but I think you can also find this somewhere on the web. But basically, if my engineer tells me it's a large, I translate that to a 34. If they tell me it's a small, I translate that to a 10. So that's how I kind of know like that entire initiative is going to be about 10 points of engineering effort. And that helps me kind of get to, like I said, this number that helps me kind of plan. So that's what I meant there, but that's the exercise. I guess before we go into them, any questions? Okay, if you do have questions, I'll maybe pop around to some breakout rooms just to make sure folks feel good, but sorry, y'all. Let me drop this in the chat. And then, I don't know, Kyle.
Yep, I got you. So we'll be doing this for about 15 minutes. The name of your team will be in your breakout room name when you go to it. So check that out there so you know which tab you're working in. If you do have any questions throughout it, we'll be here in the main room, obviously. So you can pop back in to ask us a question, and Mariah can obviously float after. Yes, we will have a break. I know that's coming up here shortly. So if you need to use the restroom or something during the break, obviously feel free to do that. But you'll be, we'll take a break here shortly. All right, everybody. I'm opening the rooms now. We'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. Just give me 1 second. Great. All right. See you all soon.
Awesome. Great. All right. You all survived. And I hopped around a little bit. It looks like everyone was able to figure out the exercise and came to some decisions about what they're bringing below the confidence line. Anyone want to share kind of your observations working with RISE, especially if it's your first time or you haven't really done prioritization before, and kind of how your group decided what to pull below? I just need one volunteer for one group. Awesome, Max.
Yeah, for us it was rather easy. It was reading text and filling in the numbers, and the discussion was pretty short every time. So, well, the description was good enough. The thing what we thought was in our daily life, we are probably not that able to be as precise with our descriptions to get those numbers. But if we have these descriptions, getting to the numbers and actually calculating the scores are rather easy. So yeah, the decision was not that hard to kick out which was it? I think the shared family logins.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. I think that's right. Like when we talked about RICE earlier, or all of the prioritization frameworks, they're really easy to use. And I think this exercise kind of showcases that, right? Especially if you have the right inputs. The inputs are the hard part. And in this case, I wanted to make sure that you all didn't have to go and find the data and try to give you some context on, kind of how this PM was viewing the thing and giving kind of that sense. But the actual exercise of ranking and prioritizing things should not be that hard. But it is hard to get to those estimates. And hopefully it gives you some examples of like the types of information to know or the types of things to consider when you're trying to come up with those various inputs for impact or effort, and having those conversations. So yeah, the objective also helps, right? So like if she was not squarely focused on audience growth, like these things could get tricky, right? Like you could have a harder time comparing between, bringing something that could provide a lot of value for subscribers, but might not have a lot of reach, right? Like it makes it harder. So it does kind of show the connection of like, all these things are really tied together. And if you can tie all these things together, like it will make road mapping really, really simple. This is not always the reality, right? And so let's talk now about how we can start communicating our roadmap. And this is where stakeholder communication comes in, which is often the hardest part. So thank you guys for participating and taking the time to do that. And let me go ahead and get back into the slides for second part of class. So let's talk about communication. So, like I mentioned, and as you all likely know, like it is extremely important to get buy-in for your roadmap because that is how you are going to, sorry, I'm trying to make sure I can see folks' faces here. Okay, cool. This is how you're going to actually, in some cases, get things done. So in addition to the immediate team that you're going to be working with to actually build and execute on the roadmap, you're also going to want to talk to cross-functional partners, leadership, to ultimately get kind of buy-in and again, the momentum to move forward. And so the nice part about doing this is one, making sure that you're fostering this open communication. I'll also pull up the chat, sorry. Making sure that you're fostering an environment of open communication. It also allows you to start to get feedback on different initiatives before you begin any actual development. It also can help in talking to partners, help you start to uncover where misalignment exists, right? Like, because misalignment will exist. And so having conversations about your roadmap can help you start to fill those gaps. A lot of us work really closely or are in newsrooms or with editorial partners. And one thing that I have to remind myself of, because I'm a couple of years removed from being in a newsroom, is that they have a very different cadence of working style. And they often have different priorities and just the tenor of the conversation is very different. So it's really important if you are having to, be outside of the newsroom or be a partner to the newsroom, but not as close to that work, making sure that you're looping them in as best as you can. Wherever you can, so that you can get their thoughts on kind of the initiatives you're putting forward, get their buy-in, especially in cases where you're going to need their participation in order to get the thing done. And so making sure that you're bringing ideas and building relationships with those partners prior to the roadmap even, so that you can have an easier time getting through the actual execution. So when you're working to get alignment and buy-in for your roadmap, you really should, I would say, aim for no surprises. The roadmap moment is not the time to surprise stakeholders with ideas. You really don't want to wait to the end of the quarter to kind of unveil a list of things that you want to get done, that you have given no prior kind of insight into or heads up on. So ideally, you're talking to partners all throughout the quarter and during roadmap planning and prioritization, so that they feel looped in and they're aware of what you're planning. I also recommend setting aside some dedicated time, if you can, to talk about your prioritized roadmap with the most senior leadership and stakeholders across the organization. So this can vary. Obviously, all of our orgs are set up differently, and there might be real silos that are challenging to overcome. But I know in my work, like this has been so invaluable because product managers do sit at the intersection of the business and the newsroom. We work with a lot of different departments. So it's really important to get alignment at the top, right? Like you need the most senior levels of leadership to be bought in. And this is especially important if you are going to need to consider trade-offs, or you're going to need some sort of like senior leadership approval. So what we do during our road mapping sessions is we have a road mapping week where we basically meet with different cross-functional partners across the org before we have a final roadmap review with all senior stakeholders, including our CEO. And so that's a moment for us to, again, discuss and have the tricky conversations about, hey, this team really wants to get this done, but we think this is the priority, and getting a chance for your most senior leaders to kind of contribute and hopefully come to some conclusion about how to move forward. I would say when you're doing this, make sure that you are not just presenting a list of initiatives, but that you are really clear about the why. So whatever form the roadmap takes, whether it's a presentation or a spreadsheet, just make sure that you're talking about all of those insights that you gathered at the very beginning of the process that supports all of the initiatives. So tell the story. Why are we prioritizing these initiatives? Why are we prioritizing them now? Give that context as you're sharing the story during your roadmap sessions. So really quick about road mapping tools. There are so many. There are so many. Every day there's a new tool. And I am not here to recommend any particular one. But I will say there are a couple of things I like to think about when considering which tools to use. I think simplicity is key. I think that whatever tool that you decide to use should be really easy for you, your team, your stakeholders to be able to access and use. So I think a lot about, what are we already using that people are familiar with? What's a tool that will not need new login or new credentials for? So that, again, that access is really, really easy. You also want to do that so that you make it easier on yourself and your team, because you're going to want this to stay updated at all times. So if it's a cumbersome tool that's hard to get into and hard to manage, you're not going to keep it updated. So to me, a roadmap is supposed to be up-to-date information and a real-time view into kind of where projects are and their statuses. And so make sure that it's simple to use, make sure that it's updated so that the rest of the org also can trust it as that communication device. And this saves you time, quite honestly, because if I know that everyone has access to this roadmap and they can go in and see what's going on, it saves me the time of having to explain where we are or getting, questions from different stakeholders about, well, where is this project and how is that, going? And it saves me a little bit of time. Here are some options of different types of tools that you could use. But again, I would say just consider, is it simple? Is this something that's going to be easy to introduce to my org? And, all of these have various strengths and various different types of capabilities. But honestly, at the Atlantic, we use a spreadsheet. We use a Google spreadsheet. It is just the easiest thing to use. We're a Google org. And so that's how we usually, share out our roadmap and just a spreadsheet. So can be simple, can be more complex, but I think, honestly, those are things I would keep in mind. As far as what to include in the roadmap, this can really vary as well, but I think there are a couple of pieces of pertinent information that will help, again, your stakeholders and also your team kind of know where things are and kind of how to keep eye keep eye on the progress. So this can be things like the project description, the goal or the KPI it's related to, who are the people working on it, so who are the project leads, so that people can know who to tap and ask questions to. What's the current status of that work? And then if you have a target launch date, putting that there so people know when to expect it. Other pieces of information that could be nice to have. So if you are using some sort of communication tool like Slack, and say you have a group in that Slack that talks about this project, you can keep that channel and note that into the roadmap so people know, okay, here's where I can go to catch up on information on this project. If you're using something like Jira to keep track of the work, that's another thing that you can include. If you have a PRD, which is a product requirements document, or any kind of brief that just describes the project in detail, that can also be in there if you'd like. Estimates as well. So those are some things you could include, but I would say avoid having too many fields because, again, that'll make it harder to keep it updated over time. And you really want this to be a source of truth. So I would avoid just making it having too many things to update at one time. A reminder too that your roadmap isn't static. So as you progress into the work, you're going to sharpen your definition on each initiative, right? Like you can't know everything about every project in detail at the start of a quarter or at the start of a new session. So you're going to uncover things that might change things priorities, and you might decide, I'm not going to do this at all anymore. It's not worth the investment. And that's okay, because your roadmap, again, should be living and breathing and responding. And so just be clear about when those things change. Update that in your roadmap talk about why, so that people understand again and get used to the idea and the concept of this thing being something that lives and breathes and changes. But let's say, again, your roadmap, you have it set, you're in progress with your roadmap, but people continue to ask you to do things that are not on your roadmap. This is going to happen as well. And it is inevitable that you're going to have requests coming in all the time. But I think what your roadmap is meant to do is communicate the most high priority initiatives that your team is spending the bulk of its time on. But there are going to always be things, especially if you are working on a product team with engineers, and you're going to be getting bugs. You're going to be trying to fix those bugs. You're going to be wanting to iterate on past releases and make improvements. And sometimes you are going to get, new requests from stakeholders. And so it really is going to be a balancing act throughout the quarter to make sure that you're, prioritizing your roadmap, but also taking care of the day-to-day, because that is your job as a product manager, is kind of finding the balance between the two. And so one thing that I will say when I get new requests from stakeholders during the quarter is I try to think about them and put them into one of three buckets. So if it's a request that feels really straightforward that only my team can handle, and I think it's small enough to execute with maybe one ticket or just one sprint where it's not going to, balloon into something else, that's something that I might just take in and I'll say, okay, like we'll make sure we can do that. So sometimes this can be things like, can you update this copy on this, surface that we, business user can't update, but your team can. So those types of things I'll just kind of try to bring in and prioritize as I can. If it's something that makes sense for our team to address, but is much more of an effort or has a lot more open questions or feels a bit more meaty, like we need to define requirements and come up with design, like that's where I'll say to the requester, like, let's talk about this and maybe this is something we, address in the next road mapping cycle. So again, not saying no, but kind of saying, let's stay in communication and maybe consider this for a future roadmap. And then finally, if it is something that does not align with like my team's responsibilities or even like goals, I try to have that conversation. It could be a tricky one, but there's sometimes these things that like they come in and they, continue to get deprioritized over and over and over, and the stakeholder doesn't understand why. And that's really frustrating because they're like, hey, I brought this request to you, but it never got done. Sometimes you do need to have that real conversation about this is just not something my team does. This is not something that we see value in. This also might be a better fit for another team is sometimes what it can be. And so I'll try to pass the request to someone else. So all that to say is, while we're talking about roadmaps and we're talking about, how they can be strategic and focused, there is still the reality of the day-to-day business and the requests that you're going to get. And so I would say roadmap initiatives should be the primary focus for your team in an ideal world, but they are likely not going to be the only thing that your team works on. And that's just kind of the reality of our businesses. So some takeaways from this section, make sure you're getting buy-in from your roadmap by setting up dedicated time to talk about what it is that you're proposing. Be sure to choose the right tool for your roadmap and use a tool that is simple and easy to use. Keep your roadmap updated so that it remains a source of truth. And finally, do stay in communication when you're, even when you're in the execution moment on an initiative, so that the next round of road mapping can go even smoother. Nice. So before I get into the last section for today and we go into Q&A, just want to see if there are any questions. I'm trying to keep an eye on this chat, and someone is building a roadmap with actual Legos. That sounds cool, and I want to see that. Not a format I've seen before, but I love that. Any questions? If not, I will keep going and we'll talk later and see if there's any questions about anything else I say, but we'll talk now about how we can action on everything. So before we get into that, I think I just want to hear maybe a little bit, some people have talked about this throughout the session today, but when it comes to the actual, okay, we have the roadmap, we have the initiatives, now we're getting them done. What are some of the things that you've seen that have stopped you from getting things on your roadmap done? Like, what are some of the roadblocks? What are some of the challenges that you've come across in trying to execute on a roadmap? Constant fire drills. That's not fun. Lack of proper workflows and processes. Yep, that's real. priorities changing, priorities get deprioritized. Editorial doesn't communicate its goals and strategies to products, and then product has to go back and add them in. Yes. Yes. So yes, I think a lot of these issues are definitely things that will stop a project in its tracks, or completely dismantle progress on a project. Again, it's not easy, but ideally, before you're getting into the execution phase, ideally you're doing those steps prior, doing road mapping to get alignment, so that as you get into the work, ideally it's not a situation of stakeholders being surprised or having conflicting priorities at that point. But that is absolutely real and absolutely a challenge. And then of course, not having proper workflows or processes can absolutely stop a project in its tracks. So let's talk a little bit about some ways that you can get development done, thinking about the product development lifecycle. And maybe some pieces and bits of this can help you in, again, taking an initiative and actually breaking out into discrete tasks so that you can then execute. So there are a lot of activities that can go into kind of taking an idea, a project or a feature from an idea to actual execution. But one tried and true, I would say, framework for doing so is this 4D product development process. So there are 4 Ds. The first D is discover. So this is the first phase of that process. And we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of class today. But this is the moment where you're kind of gathering insights and identifying the problem and opportunity areas for your roadmap. So these are, again, the things where you're conducting audience research, user interviews, data analysis, and all of those things to start help clarify that opportunity space. One thing to know about this product development process is that there are going to be moments in each phase where you'll want to tap the immediate team who's working on the actual body of work. So this could be your engineers and designers. And then there's going to be moments where you actually want to bring in your cross-functional partners so that you keep them in the loop. So your marketing teams, if you're not an editorial, like your newsroom partners. And so I like to keep these cross-functional team members in the loop throughout the process at different moments, very specific moments, so that they have more visibility into the decisions we're making during the process. It also gives them a way to give feedback throughout the process. And again, helps to start to foster that relationship of, collaboration and that spirit of collaboration. And so in this phase, I would say it's important to converge with your designers, if you have data analysts, audience researchers, engineers, and cross-functional partners, because really together you should be helping to kind of map what is the opportunity area. Then you get into the define. So this is where you're starting to hone in on your solution, you're defining the requirements, brainstorms, all of those types of things, really starting to bring shape to what it is that you're going to build. And this is where you're partnering probably more closely with just the people working on the project. So your designers, engineers, data analysts, and then you're sharing with cross-functional partners where it makes sense, some of your findings. Then you get into the develop phase. This is where you start to actually build that feature or the product. So this is where the Scrum process would kick in. So this is where the team that's actually building it starts to build the solution through sprints, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. This is also where you're going to try to make sure you have your event tracking set up and everything is QA'd so that when it goes to launch, you have confidence in how it works. And so this is really where you probably want to focus the team. And this is actually where you probably want to actually pull cross-functional stakeholders out and actually let the team who's in execute. And then finally deliver, this is where you launch the feature of the product, and you would work with teams like, maybe customer service and marketing or legal to kind of communicate out its launch, monitor performance against those KPIs through reporting, start to collect customer feedback on and get reactions to that new feature. And then you kind of take this process and you go through it again and again and again at different levels, at the feature level, at the roadmap level, to kind of continue to refine and build and hopefully have the impact that you're looking to have. So we talked about how to create a roadmap, and we just covered how we could take an initiative through that development process. So I've said the word sprint a lot today, and I want to talk a little bit about how you can connect a roadmap to a sprint. So I touched on this earlier. A sprint is a concept in agile product development that is basically a fixed time box period that ranges from 1 to 4 weeks, during which a cross-functional team can collaborate to complete a specific set of tasks or features. So once your roadmap is set up and hopefully agreed upon with your collaborators and your stakeholders, you're in a position now to start executing on all those initiatives that you promised to deliver. And so a sprint will kind of help you do that. So first, when you're thinking about a sprint, you have your prioritized stack rank list of, here's what we're going to do first. I would say the first step in thinking about how to connect it to a sprint is to think about, okay, let's go back to that roadmap initiative, and let's, start to flesh out the details. So this is where, again, something like a PRD or product requirements document would come in, which would detail everything about that initiative, from why we're building it, how it's supposed to work, what are the goals or measures of success, any timelines or launch plans, anything related to that feature should be in that document. So kind of getting, all the details around how is this meant to work, designs, things like that, user flows. Once you've detailed those requirements in some format, you're going to want to start to break down the individual tasks that need to be executed in order to build it. So this is, again, if you are in a position to, the moment where you want to be in collaboration with your engineering partners. So they're going to have the clearest sense of what and how things are going to be built in order to support those product requirements that you just defined. Now, if this isn't possible for you or isn't relevant because your project actually doesn't require developers, you can still break down individual tasks into to-dos that would need to be completed in order to get the thing launched. Next, this is where you start to estimate the effort of each individual task. So we talked earlier during the prioritization exercise about effort as it relates to the entire initiative, but now we're going to start thinking about, for those to-do items, how much effort is required for each individual task. So a lot of product teams use tools like Jira, which is a software management tool that a lot of product teams use to help execute their sprints. It helps them manage them and kind of has a collective place for everyone to go and see all of the bodies of work. So if you're using something like that, you can draft a ticket for each task and assign a number of points like we were talking about earlier based on how simple or difficult the task is. So then once you have all those tasks outlined for your roadmap initiative, you're going to want to prioritize and sequence those tasks. So again, you're doing another level of prioritization within the body of work for the roadmap. So what needs to be done first? What task is blocking another task from being completed? What needs to happen right before the launch moment? So really detailing out every single step that an engineer or a designer or whoever needs to do in order to get something executed. Now, again, because a sprint is time boxed, you only have so much time to get that work done. So you're going to want to identify what is the scope for the sprint that you have. So is it a 1-week sprint? Is it a 2-week sprint or some other time frame? And how many resources are you going to have during those 2 weeks? So, are these developers or other people who are going to be able to do the tasks in those 2 weeks or that 1 week? You can start to make estimates on how many points that team can complete as you start to do more sprints. So you'll have, over time, you'll have a history of how much work was completed in a sprint, and that can help you start to understand, okay, usually my team completes 30 points every 2 weeks. So that's really the scope that I have for the next sprint. I have, an average of 30. So I'm going to say for the next sprint, we can get 30 points done. Once you know the scope of your sprint and you have, okay, here are all the things that we know we can get done in that sprint in those 2 weeks, you can start to allocate the resources. So assigning out tickets and tasks at the start of that sprint so everyone knows this is what I'm working on for those 2 weeks. And then you're ready to start. And you do this over and over until you get to launch. And so that is the connection between roadmap and sprint. There are a lot of similar activities that happen at the roadmap level when it comes to outlining things, estimating things, prioritizing things, and then you do the same thing at the sprint level to some extent. So there's that. Couple quick tips on, trying to execute a roadmap. I would say if you're working with engineers or technical partners, it's been really helpful to use user stories when talking about requirements. So a user story is a concise, informal description of a feature from the perspective of the end user. If you're not familiar, I would say definitely Google it. You could see some examples of what user stories are. But to me, this has been really helpful in having conversations with engineers because it kind of tells them what should happen, right? Like, and it puts the onus on the technical partner to determine how. So I think in the past, I've tripped myself up with trying to tell developers how to develop, when instead I could actually tell them, this is the business outcome. This is what the end user should see. How do we make that happen? And so now the technical partner is telling me how they would actually make that happen. So that's one thing I would say. Also, when you're drafting these tasks or tickets, I would do so collaboratively with, again, engineers and designers if you can. At the Atlantic, we call these ticket writing parties. They're not really parties. We should make them more fun, but like we do get together and like, again, just try to talk about like, what is this body of work? And, you know, if we had to just like scratch pad it out together on like what needs to happen. So again, like engineers and designers and product managers are kind of together, just kind of sketching out the work. And then that kind of becomes the tickets that we draft that help execute the work. So that's one thing I would say. When it comes to prioritization, we like to use sprint goals to help guide even the sprint priority. So as you're getting into the bodies of work, and as we were talking earlier, you're not only going to be working on roadmap initiatives, so you do need to communicate as you're pulling in your sprint, as you're putting your sprint together, as you're talking about, you know, roadmap priorities versus bugs and other, you know, business as usual work. You're going to want to kind of communicate to the team, like, what's the most important thing that needs to get done by the end of this 2 weeks, right? Like you need to kind of convey, you know, what the sense of priority is even within the sprint. Because sometimes, and you'll be surprised, like even if you talk about roadmaps forever and ever with all your stakeholders, sometimes, especially the people who are executing, are not that clear on like what the priorities are. And so it does help to then again set goals at the sprint level and say, these are the top 2 things that like absolutely must get done by the end of the 2 weeks. And that kind of convinces and conveys that urgency to them. And then I would say frequent communication is key. So consider having daily stand-ups so that you can check in every day and make sure people are unblocked, or if people have questions or are stuck, they have an opportunity to talk about it. Plan the work together doing a sprint planning session. So before you get into the sprint, actually having some time to dedicate and talk about what is the sprint going to look like, who's going to work on what, things like that. And then have a retro. We have retros at the end of every sprint where the team gets together and talks about what went well, what didn't go so well, what could we do better. And those have been so valuable in helping to establish better workflows, better processes, so that we can actually, you know, and we do try our best to address, like, if something continues to come up in a retro, that means there's a process problem, or that means there's a culture problem, or something else. And so definitely recommend having retros often. Great. Here are some ways to make the product development lifecycle collaborative. So you can extend some of the concepts that you would have, you know, with that immediate working team to your cross-functional group. So you could have, you know, a separate, or maybe a separate stand-up. We have separate stand-ups that actually include our cross-functional working groups on a weekly basis, where they can come in and hear kind of where we are with projects. We make sure they're in our Slack channels. You can also, you know, continue to have roadmap status updates on a monthly or some other frequency basis, so that people understand, okay, where are we with the roadmap initiatives, and kind of have priorities shifted or changed. And then you also can continue to have conversations with your senior level or executive teams throughout. So at the Atlantic, we have monthly product reviews where every month I'm in a room with our C-suite, including our CEO, and talking about, okay, where are we with our roadmap? What are our OKRs looking like? Is there anything that's new that's coming in that like we need to address? Is there any disconnect between different teams again that we need to address? And these have been like super key again. And so that when we go into road mapping conversations, we've been having conversations that entire quarter about strategy, about the roadmap. So again, when we're talking about roadmaps at the quarterly level, it's not from scratch, it's not a surprise. Like, people are very aware of like what's been happening that whole time. Yeah, and then ongoing recurring meetings, of course, with cross-functional partners, if you can, if you're not talking to certain teams that actually do play a role in some of the work that you're trying to get done, establish a meeting and try to have more frequent conversations. Yeah, and I would say, yeah, communication is key. Like I mentioned, if you're communicating all throughout, hopefully it makes the road mapping process a little bit smoother. And again, you're not kind of having these big moments of like conversation and then just like going away, but you're actually always talking to each other. So we only have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to breeze through a quick case study, because sometimes you hear all these concepts and you're like, okay, but then like, how does this actually like apply? So let me just talk really quickly through this, and then I'll try to hopefully reserve a few minutes for like a question or two. So at the Atlantic, we wanted to figure out how to improve our checkout flow. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we collaborated to do so. So a couple of years ago, I had at the time a different title, but I was basically overseeing our subscription funnel. And I was tasked with kind of figuring out like, how do we improve this? And so I immediately started to pull together everything I could find about our subscription experience, our checkout flow into a document that I called a discovery brief, which is what I talked about earlier. It pulled together all kinds of audience research and quantitative and qualitative information. And one insight really stood out to me, which was that our conversion rates were on a decline, like pretty substantially year over year. So something was wrong. And we had not done anything in recent months to affect it. So it was something that was a little bit troubling. And so we wanted to interrogate this space. So first I reviewed the past audience research, experiment results, any optimizations we had made. I also conducted new audience research and on-site surveys to try to get feedback that we didn't have yet. And then I took all of that to try to understand and point to maybe some hypotheses around like why conversions were declining. So once we had all those insights, we had these cross-functional brainstorms where we could start to ideate on potential solutions. So for example, if an insight was that conversions were lower on mobile than on desktop, we could have a brainstorm around, what would actually address conversions on mobile devices. So then after the brainstorm, we had a ton of ideas and potential solutions to start to sort through. So I kind of took, everything out of the brainstorming tool that we used, started to pull out, different solutions that had strong hypotheses and things that were actually feasible for our team to do. And I used RICE to try to prioritize those solutions. And when I do RICE, I try to have a balance of quick iterative wins. So like, what are those like quick wins that like might be lower effort, as well as those big swings, those big impact features. So try to have a blend of both. So then once we had a good idea of the features that we wanted to develop or test, we started to communicate out this plan. It was important that the rest of the organization, especially our leadership team, understood, the work we're about to embark on, why it was important, and how we're planning to go about doing so. So then once we had all the alignment and buy-in, we moved into execution mode. We created this cross-functional working group to execute each initiative. We had 15-minute weekly stand-ups with that team in addition to the stand-ups that we have on a daily basis with our Scrum team. And, as we moved to launch certain features, some of which were experiments, we made sure we also communicated the results of that to the rest of the org and talked about what to do next. And all of this really made future quarterly roadmap planning sessions a lot smoother because all of our collaborators were really aware of what we had already done, what we had learned, and had a good sense of what we were thinking of next. And through all of that, we were not only able to have, much stronger, healthier relationships with our collaborators, we also drove real results, and we were able to increase, conversions by about 10% through our checkout flow. So that is the quick version of the case study, and you guys will have access to the slides, so you'll be able to come back and take a look at anything if things went a little too quickly there at the end. But now I'm here for questions. So if there's anything that I missed in the chat that I didn't get to in the presentation, or that you just want to know about generally, I think we might have like a minute or two for a question. Yeah, Carla.
Hello, I have a quick question about the thing that you mentioned in one of the last slides about priorities and how to balance the roadmap, so more middle long-term projects with more a daily task or a daily backlog. What would be your piece of advice or your tips to balance? Because in my case, in my team, we are just overloaded with a lot of small tasks that can take 2-3 days or even one day. And sometimes we see the tree, but we don't see the forest. You know what I mean? So,
Oh, yeah. 100%. Do you all work in like sprints or anything like that? Or how are you executing work right now?
We don't have a proper structure, so we go with the flow a little bit. Depends on priorities, depends on the deadline. We try to work defining clear deadlines, and then apart from the final deadline, let's say, so regular deadlines for the smaller task in the middle, but really we don't have a proper structure because my team is a bit special in the sense that we are a product team, but we don't have, for example, the technical team is not within our team, so it's separated, which creates certain dynamics that are a little bit challenging sometimes.
Yeah, no, that is tough. And I mean, I think as far as how to kind of balance roadmap and kind of the daily tasks, I do think a proper structure is gonna help. Just because if you are kind of operating in a mode that is kind of reactive and you don't ever kind of have that moment or way to kind of illustrate, here's kind of, our overarching goals and kind of here's kind of, what we think the product team wants to kind of like expend some of its resources on, then you are going to kind of always be in defense mode and you're always going to be kind of in that, reactive mode of kind of just like, doing the day-to-day work and not really giving yourselves the space to do that. So it might be hard, to kind of start to, you definitely can't build Rome in a day, I guess I would say, and you might want to find some small ways to start to establish maybe some of these things, right? Like maybe you don't go into sprints, but maybe you do start to time box work in a certain way so that you kind of have a moment to plan and to be thoughtful about what you're going to work on next and dedicate certain time or certain team members to work on certain initiatives, and then maybe establish a process for how you're going to deal with kind of the fire, so to speak, or the other daily work. Like we talk a little bit a little bit about the prioritization frameworks can be helpful too. Again, the prioritization frameworks don't only have to work for the roadmap level, it can also work for your day-to-day, right? Like you can literally look at like, here are all the things you have to do today. Let me start to think about what feels most urgent, what feels like we should get done first, based on everything, and not just purely like some outside deadline, but also having like your own idea of like what's actually important for the business and for like what my team is here to do. Having that be an input for like what is actually important to get done, I think will be helpful too. So definitely hard when you don't have kind of those like established workflows and culture, but like I think you can start to find little ways to introduce some of these things to hopefully get towards a world where you feel like, okay, we have a good balance, right? Like I think for me, we try to say like 80% of our sprint is roadmap and 20% is BAU, bugs, other stuff. And that varies sprint to sprint. But like if we feel that coming too far apart where we're like 30% is on roadmap and everything else is just like us firefighting, then like something's wrong. So that's what I would say. I wish we had more time, y'all. I'm sorry that I didn't get to every question or every comment in the chat, but this is so lovely to talk to you all today, and hopefully you got something helpful out of the session. And my email is here if you do have questions, and you want to reach out later or connect me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to. So good luck with the rest of the course.
Thank you so much, Mariah. This class was amazing. Couple updates before we head out. I bet Kyle or Sam is going to drop the feedback form in the chat. So please give us feedback. We'll also put it in Slack, obviously. Last week, not as many of you took the feedback survey as previous weeks. So it's not too late to take that one either. So please take the surveys. We really do use these to inform the curriculum and changes, and also like immediately give you guys what you need. So please take the surveys. And then next week we have a break. So you should be meeting with your coaches. If you have not scheduled your first coaching call, do that immediately. Hopefully you can get with your coach soon, talk about your game plan for your capstone, and take a little week to either plan, work on stuff, or just like take a breather, whatever you need. Hopefully I'll see all of you at the summit. I can't wait. And that's it for now. We'll be back in 2 weeks. So if you have any questions in the meantime, we are always on Slack for you.
Thanks, everybody. See you in a couple weeks.